At dawn on the 3rd of January 2026, U.S. forces seized a president in Caracas. No invasion, no shock and awe, just speed, intelligence, and total control of the battlefield. Within hours, a question spread far beyond Venezuela. If Washington could do this, could Beijing do the same to Taiwan? On Chinese social media, the idea exploded. Replicate the operation. Arrest Taiwan's leader. Solve the Taiwan problem in one stroke. It sounds seductive, clean, surgical, decisive. But strategy is never about imitation. It is about context. And context is where this theory collapses. What the United States exploited in Venezuela was not just military weakness, but political rot, institutional decay, and a hollowed-out state. Those conditions do not exist in Taiwan. If you want to understand why this operation is not a blueprint but a warning, you need to look beyond the headlines and into the systems underneath. If this kind of analysis matters to you, stay with me. Because the real story starts now. The debate, then, is not about tactics. It is about misreading power. Operation Absolute Resolve looked simple only because the United States had already solved the hardest problems before a single soldier moved. Information dominance, political mapping, institutional collapse inside the target state. Many observers fixated on the final act, the arrest. They ignored the years of intelligence penetration, the internal distrust within Venezuela's regime, and the absence of resilient state institutions. Taiwan is built differently. It is not held together by one man. It does not rest on fear, patronage, or personal loyalty. The core question is this: can a decapitation strike work against a system designed to survive leadership loss? For Beijing, removing a leader is not the same as winning control. Unification requires governance, legitimacy, and sustained authority over a hostile population. An arrest does none of that. To understand why this distinction matters, we have to step back. We have to look at how Venezuela became vulnerable in the first place and why Taiwan did not. Venezuela's collapse was not sudden. It was cumulative. Years of economic freefall eroded loyalty inside the state. Sanctions hollowed out institutions. Corruption fractured the security forces. Power concentrated upward, but resilience drained downward. By the time US planners moved, the regime functioned more like a shell than a system. Authority depended on fear and patronage, not legitimacy. Once those bonds weakened, the state lost its ability to absorb shock. Taiwan followed the opposite path. Its political system evolved to distribute power, not concentrate it. Elections rotate leadership. Courts constrain executives. Media and civil society act as parallel centers of accountability. In economic terms, Venezuela experienced negative institutional feedback loops. Every crisis made the next crisis easier. Taiwan built positive ones. Each transition reinforced continuity and public trust. That difference matters more than missiles or commandos. Decapitation works only when the head carries the whole body. Taiwan's system does not. This structural contrast explains why copying tactics misses the point. And it sets the stage for the first real stress test when theory meets crisis. The first real test comes with the idea of speed. Strike fast enough, and the system collapses before it can respond. That logic worked in Caracas because the response system was already broken. Command chains were brittle, trust was thin. No one knew who would still be standing after sunrise. Now imagine the same moment in Taipei. Sirens, confusion, a sudden leadership shock. But then something different happens. Institutions move, succession rules activate, commands reroute. Public communication does not vanish, it multiplies. What looks like paralysis from the outside becomes controlled turbulence inside. Noise, not collapse. This is where decapitation theories usually fail. They assume fear spreads faster than coordination. That legitimacy evaporates instantly. That societies freeze. Taiwan has spent years planning for the opposite. Counter-decapitation drills, redundant command structures, a political culture conditioned for crisis, not obedience. For Beijing, this creates a nightmare scenario, a risky operation, no decisive payoff, and a population more unified, not less. If you're still following, pause for a moment. Ask yourself who benefits when a gamble fails. Because once the first shock doesn't end the story, the mechanism underneath becomes far more dangerous. Beneath the drama of special forces and midnight raids lies a quieter truth. The real weapon is not speed, it is systems integration. In Venezuela, the United States did not just dominate land, air, and sea. It dominated information, signals, narratives, decision cycles. Before boots touched the ground, outcomes were already shaped. Networks were mapped, responses were anticipated, resistance was isolated before it could coordinate. This is the part most imitators misunderstand. Hardware can be copied, software cannot. The PLA has made enormous strides in missiles, ships, and sensors. But true joint, decentralized warfare is not a switch you flip. It is a culture you build, a habit of trust between services, a tolerance for initiative under pressure. Taiwan, meanwhile, sits inside a dense web of surveillance, counterintelligence, and civilian awareness. Every move creates ripples. Every ripple is noticed. This makes surgical operations exponentially harder. Not impossible, but politically explosive and operationally fragile. And when fragility meets ambition, history rarely rewards the bold. Which brings us to the second crisis point. Not on the battlefield, but in the lives of ordinary people. Now shift the lens from generals to kitchens, from command rooms to ordinary lives. If you live in Taiwan, decapitation is not an abstract theory. It is a lived possibility, one rehearsed, discussed, prepared for. You are not waiting for rescue. You are part of the system. A sudden strike would not just target leaders, it would target confidence, your sense of normal life, your belief that tomorrow still functions. And yet, this is where the strategy breaks again. Fear does not automatically produce surrender. Sometimes it produces clarity. In Taiwan, crisis tends to activate participation, not passivity. Local governments communicate, civil society mobilizes, information spreads laterally, not just from the top down. A failed decapitation attempt would harden identity. It would make neutrality impossible. It would turn hesitation into resolve. That is the human cost Beijing must calculate. Not just outrage abroad, but resistance at home. If this analysis resonates with you, share it. Because understanding deterrence is not the job of governments alone. And once people move, the consequences no longer stay local. Once people move, borders stop containing the damage. A strike on Taiwan would not stay a cross-strait issue. It would become a systemic shock. Shipping lanes react first. Insurance markets spike. Supply chains hesitate. Semiconductors stop being abstractions and start becoming leverage. Governments, too, would be forced to choose. Silence becomes alignment. Neutrality becomes suspect. In Latin America, the US operation in Venezuela produced mixed reactions but not mass outrage. That matters. It signals that global responses are no longer automatic. They are contextual. Taiwan is different. It is a democracy. It is embedded in advanced economies. It sits at the heart of technological interdependence. A Chinese decapitation attempt would trigger faster, harder alignment against Beijing. More assets forward deployed, more sanctions, more political space for Taipei. Ironically, what looked like a shortcut to control would widen the strategic front. The cost curve would steepen. The room for de-escalation would shrink. This is why great powers fear unintended cascades more than resistance itself. And this leads us to the final question. If force is risky and restraint is unstable, what comes next? Looking ahead, Taiwan's future is not a single line, it is a spectrum. Scenario 1, the best case. Resilience holds. Counter-decapitation measures function flawlessly. Diplomatic alignments strengthen. China hesitates, recalibrates, and the status quo is reinforced. Scenario 2, middling. Pressure increases, minor incursions or shows of force destabilize local politics. Economies wobble. Taiwan adapts, but uncertainty grows. Scenario 3, worst case. A miscalculated strike, partial disruption, chaos ensues. But even here, the system does not collapse entirely. Governance persists, continuity mechanisms operate, public resilience hardens into political resolve. The lesson is clear. Context is everything. A successful operation against a hollow state does not scale to a mature democracy. For Beijing, imitation is seductive, but the stakes are exponentially higher. For Taiwan, preparation and institutional strength remain the ultimate shield. Bridge to conclusion. Understanding these dynamics is not academic. It is existential. Every policy, every exercise, every civilian awareness program reinforces the survival of the system itself. Because in strategic calculus, underestimating resilience is the fastest path to failure. In the end, the lesson of Operation Absolute Resolve is not about speed or force. It is about precision, preparation, and context. The US achieved a surgical strike in Venezuela because it matched strategy to environment, exploited weaknesses, and coordinated every element of power. It was a masterpiece, but also uniquely American, uniquely Venezuelan. For China, Taiwan is a different canvas. Leadership removal alone cannot achieve unification. Institutional strength, public resilience, and global scrutiny make decapitation far from decisive. Chaos alone does not produce control. For Taiwan, the imperative is clear. Strengthen counter-decapitation measures, preserve government continuity, and reinforce societal cohesion. Every drill, every contingency plan, every redundancy adds a layer of protection. And for observers worldwide, there is a larger insight. Modern power is not measured only by military might. It is measured by how systems endure under pressure. If you found this analysis revealing, share it. Because understanding resilience, deterrence, and the true meaning of strategic power may be the difference between shock and survival. This is where strategy, human behavior, and political reality converge lessons that no blueprint can ever fully capture.